Welcome to the Panic Button. I'm Nina, and today we're going to be talking about J.K. Rowling and Boy George. Because apparently they had a couple spats online, and, well, it didn't work out for Boy George the way that I think he wanted it to. So let's just get right into it.
Unbelievable. Well, let's move on to J.K. Rowling, one of your fellow heroes, heroines, should say, I guess, in the campaign that was so triumphant last week with the Supreme Court's ruling. Boy George says that J.K. Rowling, because she continues with this campaign, must hate men. As I said in my monologue at the beginning of the show, well, at least she doesn't chain them to radiators and hit them with a blunt instrument like you did, George. But you must get this as well. Doesn't that annoy you? That Boy George's interpretation of J.K. Rowling's heartfelt campaign that you've been such a part of as well, to get women's rights, biological sex ruling, he interprets this as she must hate men.
Isn't the irony of all of that recognizing then that trans-identifying men, trans women, are men? I mean, that is literally what he's saying. You know, that is the irony of the situation. And you were spot on. You know, this is a man in 2009 that served 15 months for false imprisonment and assaulting a male escort. And also a man who spent most of his life with more makeup on than I've ever done in my life. And no one ever had a problem with it, did they? You know, so there's so much there's irony amongst that. It's just ridiculous. JK's been very happily married for a long time. She absolutely doesn't hate men at all. She's just a women's rights campaigner. You know, and we talk a lot about toilets, but actually the serious side of it is it's right crisis centres. You know, it's hospitals, like you said. It's working rights.
Okay. So in that tweet that he posted, the other thing that he said was that she could not tell if a trans woman was a man or not, which is a bunch of baloney. Because if a woman is in a personal space with someone who is a trans woman, I'm going to say 99.8% of the time, a woman will always be able to tell over a man being able to tell. Because throughout eons, millenniums, women have been, how do I say this? Women have had to know when men are around in order to keep themselves safe. Because men are more of a threat to women than women are to women. So through the ages, we've gained a sixth sense of when there is a man around. We just have that thing that goes off. We could tell. And so women are much better at picking up on it than men ever will be. So when he says that J.K. Rowling can't tell when a trans woman is a man, it is a bunch of baloney. Because most of the time, majority of the time, we can. That's why I find it funny when gay men or just regular men say, oh, well, this trans woman passes. A lot of women are like, really? You don't see. You don't see. And that's why I don't like sometimes when men come into the conversation and they're like, yeah, they pass, because you're not understanding it from a female perspective. You're seeing it from a male perspective, and that makes your perspective flawed. So let's go over what Boy George said. Because Boy George made another post, which went viral on X. He's responding to J.K. Rowling saying this: when persecution is redefined to mean not being allowed to reorganize society based on falsified feelings, to compel everyone else's speech and belief, and to take rights away from other protected groups, you'll be absolutely right. Boy George said, the right to be left alone by a rich, bored bully. Okay. Well, J.K. Rowling retorted with this: there are many differences between us, George, but some are particularly relevant to this debate. 1. You're a man and I'm a woman. 2. You've been wealthy and famous since your early 20s. I didn't become well known until I was well over 30. 3. I've never been given 15 months for handcuffing a man to a wall and beating him with a chain. Kind of proves that even if a man is inherently feminine, he could still be violent and overpower a man. 4. I believe in freedom of speech and belief. For more than half of my life, I was a regular anonymous person. Some of those years were spent in poverty. She goes on to say, that's why I understand the importance of single-sex spaces for women. who's reliant on state-funded services. That's why I understand why mixed public changing rooms are a problem for women. That's why I have a problem with men identifying into women's rape crisis centers, domestic abuse, and homeless shelters that are supposed to be single-sex. I don't stand against gender identity ideology because I personally still need those services, but because my life has taught me exactly how vulnerable women are when they don't have the money influence I have now. She goes on to say, you yourself have been convicted of violent assault. The overwhelming number of people who commit crimes of violence are male, just like you. That's why I don't want to see men identifying into women's prison cells or any spaces mentioned above. Not all men are violent or predatory, but enough are to make safeguarding necessary. Lastly, I'm a writer who believes in freedom of speech and belief. As we both know, the safe, fashionable thing in the arts world right now is to do exactly what you're doing. Parrot, TWAW, I don't know what that means, throw it in the comments, and sneer at the unenlightened plebs who think sex is important and matters. For a man who was once all about nonconformity, George, you couldn't have become more predictably or more tediously conformist. And that's true. Boy George used to be just a regular dude dressing like a woman back in the day. It was controversial, but everyone accepted it, like glam hair bands, where dudes in rock bands were wearing more makeup than women, dressing like women with cheek chillers and lipstick, frizzy hair, long hair. It was a thing. Annie Lennox, she pushed the boundaries as well, but if we're talking specifically about men, David Bowie would be another one. It was called at the time, and I think still should be called, androgyny. They were androgynous. It was a thing you did, especially in the arts. But now, people like him and Eddie Izzard are identifying into a group that they didn't identify into before in order to, I don't know, gain more acceptance and popularity, whatever you want to call it. But by also doing that, they're conforming to the ideology and parroting these talking points that absolutely make no sense and do more harm to women. So when I looked this up about what Boy George did, it shows you a picture of the dude. And it says, this is, I don't know how to pronounce his name, so apologies, but this is Auden, the former male escort who was chained to a radiator and beaten by violent trans activist Boy George, who was attacking J.K. Rowling for protecting women. He spent 8 years in therapy and said the singer ruined his life. So I asked Grok. Now, Grok isn't always right. Grok can sometimes be incredibly woke. But I asked Grok, did Boy George beat up a man? And it said this. In 2009, Boy George O'Dowd, was convicted of assault and false imprisonment of Auden Carlson, a Norwegian male escort. Court reports state that in April 2007, O'Dowd handcuffed Carlson to a wall in his London flat and beat him with a metal chain. Carlson testified he escaped by breaking the fixture and was chased and further beaten as he fled. The judge described the act as premeditated, callous, and humiliating, leaving Carlson shocked, degraded, and traumatized. Though his physical injuries were not serious or permanent, O'Dowd was sentenced to 15 months in prison, serving 4 months before release for good behavior. Good behavior for 4 months for doing bad behavior. That doesn't make any sense. Good behavior, yes, because he couldn't behave badly in prison for 4 months. Anyone could fake being good for 4 months. I think the justice system in the UK and in the US are not hard enough on certain criminals, I'm telling you. O'Dowd admitted to handcuffing Carlson, claiming it was to check his laptop for stolen photos, and said he was high on cocaine and experiencing a psychotic episode. Are all trans activists this unhinged, or is this just a one-off case? If you've seen any trans activism, it seems like this has become the norm, where it's violent and nasty and unhinged. It doesn't make trans look good when you have these activists acting this way. He has consistently denied beating Carlson with a chain, though he was convicted of assault. In later interviews, he expressed regret, attributing his actions to drug addiction, and has remained sober since. Carlson has spoken about ongoing trauma, including PTSD, and criticized platforms like ITV for giving O'Dowd high-profile roles, arguing the response would differ if the victim were a woman. I'd have to say, I don't know if Boy George identifies as trans. I don't think he does. But if he did, I don't think there would be much of a difference in how Boy George was treated. You see, because a lot of these trans women who attack women somehow magically end up in women's prisons, surrounded by a whole bunch of potential victims. So I think what it comes down to is any man who identifies as trans, or any man who is androgynous or identifies into the LGBTQ or however, has more leeway when it comes to the law than just a regular straight man, which I think is completely unfair. And so what do we do from here? Where do we go? Where do we go from here? Well, if there's a dude who is doing bad things, and then there's a dude who identifies as a woman who's doing bad things, I think we should treat them equally. We should give them the same sentence, because that's showing criminals that if you do something bad, all you have to do is identify as a woman, and not only will you get a lighter sentence, but you'll get to be around a whole bunch of ladies who aren't a threat to you, aside from going into a male prison where, well, there's a lot more threats around. But anyway, what do you guys think? Do you think that Boy George is unhinged? I do. Do you think J.K. Rowling is in the right for what she said? I mean, she pretty much put him on blast, and she made a very, very good point, which is something that I am jealous of when it comes to J.K. Rowling, is her ability to be eloquent and express herself through words in a way that I never could. These men, especially like Pedro Pascal and him, say J.K. Rowling is a bully and blah, blah, blah. She's a bully because she's standing up for women. That's not a bully. She's pointing out obvious flaws within the ideology and the rhetoric and the laws. And because of that, she's a bully. But then they will turn around and do stuff and say stuff that is actually being a bully. But I don't think these people are able to self-reflect. I think there's something deeply, deeply unhinged within their brain that makes them unable to acknowledge how they act and how it's actually wrong. You'll see a lot of these celebrity men who will go after J.K. Rowling for specifically just defending women because they know someone who is a male identifying as a woman. And Pedro Pascal, he's an older dude. He very much has homosexual tendencies, which is fine, but he comes off as an asshole. And a lot of celebrities come off as assholes, but when you're a male and you come across as an asshole to specifically women, then you are pretty much ruining your facade. You're ruining the way that people see you, because now they kind of see you as this guy who's a big asshole who's specifically going after women because they want men not to be in their spaces. Also, I can't stand Pedro Pascal. He's in everything. And it's like Nickelback. After a while, it's like, can we hear or see something else? There are so many talented people out there. So many that don't get the chance because we have to insert Pedro Pascal into everything, which makes me think that he must be gay or identify into the LGBTQ blah blah in some way, because it seems like he's getting preferential treatment over other actors, and I don't like that. I think that's very elitist and very snobby. Anyway, like and subscribe to this channel, join our memberships, and I'll see you in the next one.